No one heard Nick Reiner speak from inside jail, but the silence he left behind is louder than any confession. Because what if December 14th wasn't a sudden collapse, but the final step of something already decided? He erased the part no headline explained. Nick didn't believe he was being punished. He believed he was being removed quietly, permanently, without a way back. And if that belief shaped every move he made, then this isn't just a crime story. It's a warning about what happens when fear, control, and silence collide inside a powerful family long before the world notices anything is wrong. Nick Reiner didn't enter December 2025 thinking his life was about to explode. He entered it believing something quieter and far more dangerous was already happening. Long before December 14th, before police tape, before headlines swallowed the Reiner name, Nick had become convinced that decisions about his life were being made without him in the room. And the most unsettling part is this. Nothing about the outside world looked urgent enough to raise alarms. No screaming matches. No public breakdowns. Just a slow, invisible shift that only one person seemed to feel. Inside the Reiner home, things had changed in ways that were easy to dismiss if you weren't already afraid. Conversations stopped when Nick walked in. Schedules adjusted without explanation. Plans were discussed later. To most families, that kind of tension comes and goes. But for someone who had spent years cycling through recovery, relapse, and shame, those small changes felt deliberate. Nick didn't see coincidence. He saw coordination. And once that idea took root, everything else began to bend around it. What made this belief stronger wasn't cruelty, it was calm. Rob Reiner wasn't angry. He wasn't threatening. Friends described him during this period as focused, organized, almost serene. Calls were made behind closed doors. Appointments lined up neatly. Conversations were efficient. To outsiders, it looked like responsible parenting under pressure. To Nick, that steadiness felt terrifying. Calm, in his mind, didn't mean patience. It meant the decision had already been finalized. The fight was over. He just hadn't been informed yet. This is where the story starts to matter because fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like withdrawal. People around Nick noticed he wasn't lashing out anymore. He wasn't arguing about rehab. He wasn't making promises or excuses. Instead, he watched. He listened. He started reading faces instead of words. Every pause felt loaded. Every vague answer felt like a cover. When he asked questions, "What's the plan? Am I coming back this time?" the responses were soft, careful, meant to soothe. But to Nick, softness sounded like avoidance. And avoidance felt like proof. Michelle Singer Reiner tried to keep things grounded. She encouraged rest, routine, taking things one day at a time. People close to the family say Nick loved his mother deeply, but even that relationship became tangled in his fear. He began to believe she was either being protected from the truth or quietly agreeing with decisions she didn't want to confront. That belief hurt more than anger ever could. Because betrayal from strangers is one thing. Betrayal, or what feels like it from the people meant to protect you, rewires how you see everything. What most people missed during this time was the shift in Nick's inner goal. He wasn't focused on recovery anymore. According to leaked rehab notes and staff recollections, Nick kept asking the same question during his final stays. When does this end? Not the program. His place in the family. Counselors described him as quiet, alert, almost waiting for bad news. One wrote that Nick no longer saw rehab as a chance to heal, but as a holding pattern, a timeout, while others decided his future. Each return home felt shorter, colder, less permanent. This belief didn't come from one argument or one threat. It came from patterns Nick thought he recognized. His father's composure, his mother's reassurances, the lack of direct confrontation. In Nick's mind, those weren't signs of care. They were signs of containment. And once he accepted that idea, his behavior changed in a way that looked deceptively stable. He stopped pushing back because he believed pushing back was pointless. One person close to him said it felt like Nick had already lost the argument in his head, so he stopped arguing out loud. By the time December approached, Nick wasn't asking if something was coming. He was trying to figure out when. That's the detail most people still struggle to grasp. December 14th didn't feel sudden to him. It felt like a deadline. And when someone believes their life is about to be quietly taken out of their hands, fear doesn't always explode. Sometimes it condenses. It sharpens. It waits. And that waiting, controlled, silent, unnoticed is where this story truly begins. By the time the calendar flipped deeper into December, something about Nick Reiner had unmistakably changed, but not in the way people are trained to look for. There were no dramatic scenes, no frantic calls for help, no obvious signals that would later feel like missed warnings. What replaced them was something far harder to detect: focus. Not hopeful focus, not motivation, but the kind that settles in when someone believes the ending has already been written. People around Nick began noticing how still he had become. He stopped talking about the future entirely. No casual plans. No "when I'm better." No jokes about next year. It was as if time beyond the present had quietly disappeared for him. Leaked messages from that period show a shift in tone, not emotional, but logistical. Nick wasn't asking for reassurance anymore. He was asking practical questions. Where would I go? How long is long term? Is it permanent? Each answer came back gentle, carefully worded, designed to reduce fear. But to Nick, careful sounded rehearsed. And rehearsed meant planned. This is where silence began to feel loud. Rob Reiner never raised his voice. There were no explosive arguments, no ultimatums. Instead, there were short phone calls taken privately, schedules kept tight, conversations that ended just a little too neatly. To outsiders, it looked like stability. To Nick, it felt final. One person close to the family later explained it this way: Nick believed the kindness was the cover. The calm was the signal. If things were still undecided, there would be chaos. But there wasn't. There was order. And order, in Nick's mind, meant the decision had already been made. Behavioral changes followed. Nick started pacing at night, walking the same path through the house over and over, not frantically, but methodically. Others noticed him organizing his belongings, not throwing anything away, not packing, just touching things, lining them up, straightening them, as if committing the space to memory. Experts who later reviewed these behaviors didn't see panic. They saw preparation, the kind that happens when someone believes they're about to lose access to their own life. Perhaps the most painful shift was the emotional distance Nick created between himself and the people he cared about most. With his sister, Romy, there was no visible conflict, just space. Nick reportedly believed she was safer not knowing everything, protected the same way he believed his mother was. That belief deepened his sense of isolation. In his mind, everyone else was being shielded from a truth only he could see. And when someone feels like the only person in the room who understands what's coming, the loneliness becomes unbearable. What's chilling is how normal everything looked from the outside. No neighbors called for help. No friends raised alarms. There were no viral moments. No red flags obvious enough to stop the momentum building quietly inside Nick. He wasn't spiraling outward. He was collapsing inward. People close to him later said it felt like he stopped asking for comfort because he didn't believe comfort was honest anymore. Mental health professionals reviewing the timeline later noted a key shift in Nick's thinking during this period. Instead of interpreting actions as attempts to help him, he began seeing them as steps toward finishing something. The narrative flipped in his mind. It wasn't "they're trying to save me." It became "they're preparing to remove me." And once that belief locked in, it brought a strange kind of resolve. Fear didn't make him frantic. It made him precise. Nick began paying attention to timing. Appointments that lined up too perfectly. Conversations that felt too smooth. Even moments of affection felt suspicious, as if they were being offered in advance, not in the moment. According to people close to him, he started counting days without saying it out loud. December stopped being a month. It became a countdown. This is the moment the story tightens. Because when someone believes their control is slipping away permanently, their world narrows. Options disappear. Waiting feels dangerous. And silence, the same silence everyone else interpreted as calm, becomes proof that the choice has already been made. Nick didn't think he was running out of chances. He believed he had already used them all. And whatever was coming next, he was sure of one thing. Once it arrived, there would be no coming back.
Then I think it's a very sad day, because we know that racism hasn't gone away. It's there. But this man has given voice to it. And so we're going to find very carefully how many people really have those feelings.
December 13th should have been forgettable. On paper, it looked like a perfectly ordinary Hollywood night, the Reiner family attending Conan O'Brien's party, surrounded by familiar faces, laughter, and camera flashes. To the outside world, it was a picture of stability. A powerful family showing up together, intact. But for Nick Reiner, that night quietly confirmed something he had been afraid to admit to himself for weeks. People who were there remember Nick as present, but disconnected. He wasn't causing scenes. He wasn't intoxicated. He wasn't acting out. Instead, he moved through the room like someone observing from a distance. Several guests later recalled that Nick kept asking similar questions to different people, phrased slightly differently each time. What do you do? Are you recognized? Does that matter to you? At first, it sounded like awkward small talk, but the repetition lingered. One guest later said it felt like Nick wasn't interested in the answers, he was measuring something else entirely. Investigators believe this was a moment where Nick's private fears collided with a very public space. Surrounded by celebrities, influence, and unspoken hierarchies, Nick became hyper-aware of who belonged and who mattered in the room. For someone already feeling erased inside his own family, the contrast may have been unbearable. He wasn't spiraling, he was processing. Quietly, intensely, Rob and Michelle stayed close to Nick throughout the night. To observers, it looked supportive, united. But people familiar with Nick's state of mind say the emotional distance was already there. Even when standing next to his parents, Nick remained cut off. He spoke little. He listened more. And by the time the family left the party, several witnesses noticed a shift. Nick became even quieter, almost as if something inside him had closed. That night didn't break him, but it solidified a belief. If decisions about his life were being made in rooms full of powerful people, rooms like that party, then his fears weren't imagined. They were confirmed. The laughter, the ease, the way plans flowed without him, it all fed the idea that the world was moving forward while he was being quietly left behind. By the time the family returned home, the house felt heavy. Not tense in an explosive way, just weighted. From later reconstructions, Nick barely spoke. He chose his words carefully, if at all. He watched his parents closely, especially his father. Rob's voice stayed steady, calm, almost comforting. But to Nick, that steadiness felt wrong. It felt like the calm that comes when something irreversible has already been decided. One detail investigators would later fixate on was Nick's attention to timing that night. He checked his phone repeatedly, not to message anyone, but to watch the screen light up and go dark. He moved slowly through the house, deliberately, as if anchoring himself to each space. Behavioral experts later described this as someone memorizing a place they believe they're about to lose. What makes this night so disturbing is how little anyone noticed. There were no fights, no dramatic confrontations, no clear warning signs that would later feel obvious in hindsight. To the family, it was just another difficult evening that would pass, like others before it. But to Nick, this wasn't another round. This felt final. Experts who later studied his behavior believe Nick had crossed a psychological line that night. He no longer believed there was time to wait, to talk, to negotiate. He believed the window to act, however, he understood that was closing fast. And once someone reaches that point, logic stops functioning the way we expect it to. Nick wasn't reacting to what was happening in front of him. He was reacting to what he believed was about to happen next. And that belief turned an ordinary night into a silent countdown. By the time the house went quiet and the lights went out, Nick's inner world was louder than ever. The fear of being erased, of being sent away and forgotten, had hardened into certainty. And when certainty replaces doubt, the most dangerous thing is how calm it can look from the outside. Nothing exploded that night, but everything shifted.
Which I didn't know that they even had lyrics. And I think Albert Brooks was on,
That's
and
right.
Billy Crystal, and Harry Shearer, and I think Penny Marshall was on.
By the morning of December 14th, Nick Reiner wasn't moving like someone in crisis. He was moving like someone following a path he believed had already been laid out. Investigators later noted how controlled his behavior was that day. No rushing, no panic, no visible breakdown. People who spoke with him described his voice as flat, polite, almost distant. That detail matters because emotional collapse doesn't always look chaotic. Sometimes it looks empty. Inside the Reiner home, the atmosphere stayed tense but restrained. Conversations were short. Rob focused on plans, keeping the day structured and calm. Michelle tried to preserve normalcy, suggesting food, small routines, ordinary moments. But people close to Nick say he wasn't really there anymore. He wasn't listening for comfort. He was listening for confirmation. Every soft word felt like finality. Every avoided conversation felt like proof that the real discussion had already happened without him. At some point that afternoon, Nick left the house briefly. Where he went mattered less than why. Investigators believe he was trying to ground himself to reclaim a sense of control over a day that felt like it was slipping away from him. When he returned, witnesses say he seemed calmer, but not relieved. It was the calm of acceptance, not peace. According to people close to the case, by late afternoon, Nick had become fully convinced that there would be no more chances, no more explanations, and no way back from whatever his parents had decided. As evening settled in, the house grew quieter. Not the comfortable quiet of resolution, but the heavy kind where every sound feels too loud. Behavioral experts later said this was the most dangerous moment not because of anger, but because of emotional shutdown. Nick wasn't acting from rage. He was acting from a belief that time had run out. In that mental state, choices collapse into a single path, one that feels necessary rather than optional. What followed didn't look dramatic to the outside world. There were no frantic calls, no neighbors reporting disturbances, no visible signs that something irreversible was about to happen. But inside Nick's mind, the story had already ended. He believed that if he waited any longer, the decision would be taken from him completely. And when someone believes they've lost control forever, even terrible actions can feel logical. Afterward, Nick didn't run. He didn't hide. Records show he left quietly and checked into a nearby hotel. Staff later said nothing about him seemed unusual. He was polite, calm, distant. That contrast between the magnitude of what had happened and the lack of visible emotion would later become one of the most unsettling parts of the case. Investigators found evidence linking him back to the house, suggesting he hadn't thought about consequences at all. Experts believe this supports one conclusion: Nick wasn't thinking about the future. He was trapped in a narrow present, looping inside his own belief system. As hours passed, unanswered calls began stacking up back at the house. The silence grew heavier. When Romy finally arrived later that day, the unlocked door and stillness told her everything before words could. Within minutes, police were called. The private world of the Reiner family cracked open, and a tragedy became a public reckoning. Not long after, authorities traced Nick to the hotel. When officers approached him, witnesses say he wasn't confused. He wasn't shocked. One officer later said Nick acted like he already knew why they were there. As the evidence lined up, Nick didn't resist. He didn't deny. He walked forward calmly, as if stepping into something he had been preparing for. That calm would haunt everyone involved. Not because it explained anything, but because it raised a question no one could answer. Had the ending already happened in Nick's mind long before that day?
The whole process for me, I can just speak for myself, it did make me understand him a lot more, and I think it made me a better father. Hopefully it did.
As Nick Reiner sat behind concrete walls in the weeks that followed, one thing became impossible to ignore. He never tried to control the story. He didn't give interviews. He didn't shape public perception. He didn't argue what happened. According to people close to the case, he focused instead on explaining how he saw the world before December 14th. The fear, the belief of being removed, the sense that his life was being decided without him. That silence forced everyone else to speak in his place. This case unsettled people not because it offered excuses, but because it exposed how tragedy can grow quietly, fed by misinterpretation, exhaustion, and years of unresolved fear. Investigators, psychologists, and legal experts all returned to the same uncomfortable idea. This wasn't one sudden act. It was a slow collapse no one recognized until it was too late. Whether Nick's beliefs were true or tragically distorted may never be fully agreed upon. What remains is a family broken not only by one night, but by long silences, crossed intentions, and the dangerous gap between care and control. Some stories don't end with clear answers. They end by forcing us to sit with questions that refuse to go away. And maybe that's the hardest truth of all. Subscribe for more deep dive investigations that go beyond the headlines.